Sorry, before we move on to item 1, I'd like to welcome members of the public to the Planning South Committee today, Tuesday 18th of April. And before we start, can I just remind you this is a committee meeting at which the public are present, but it is not a public meeting. Just one item of housekeeping. We are not expecting a fire drill today, so should you hear the alarm, please make your way to the fire exits you'll see over there and here, and make your way outside to the assembly point, which is by the bandstand. Can I just remind members to switch off their phones or turn them silent, and finally to remember to turn on your microphone before speaking and turn them off when you're finished. Thank you very much. Before we start the official meeting, could the officers please introduce themselves?
I am Guy Brest, the Applications Team Leader.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development Management and Building Control.
And Sonia Sharps, Solicitor at Legal Services.
And Liz Fennick, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. Fine, item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies, Liz?
Yes, we do. We've received apologies from Councillor Liz Kitchen, Lynn Lambert and Josh Potts. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, we need to approve the minutes of the last meeting, 24th of January 2023. Can I take it that you all agree to these minutes? Thank you very much. Item 3, declaration of members' interests. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor van der Kloot.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to just remind everybody that I'm a member of the South Downs National Park Authority, which is a public interest but not prejudicial. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? In which case we move on to 4. Announcements. I don't have any announcements. Item 5, appeals. These are for noting unless any member has a comment to make. Anybody? No? Fine. In that case, before we move on to the first application, which is DC 21-2676, could Jack Lawrence please go to the table there, ready to give his comments. Thank you. Okay, DC 21-2676. This is for the conversion of a redundant barn to form one number single dwelling house, incorporating creation of first floor and alterations and restoration works, erection of a detached garage, installation of ground-mounted solar panels, and drainage, landscape, and ecological enhancements. Can we start the presentations, please?
Thank you. This application relates to an agricultural barn off Northlands Lane, south of Greenhouse Lane. So the red star on this slide shows the location of the site, and for context, the blue line at the bottom of the slide shows the northern edge of Storrington. This is an aerial view of the existing barn, which is primarily surrounded by open fields. This is the existing building, which dates to the late 19th century, and which the council's conservation officer has said should be considered as a non-designated heritage asset. The application seeks consent to convert this barn into a dwelling. Planning permission was previously refused on the site for a dwelling in 2020, and this layout plan shows this previously refused scheme, which also included a single-storey extension, with the location of that extension shown by the red box. And these are the refused elevations, which again show the previous extension shown in red. So in contrast, this current scheme seeks to retain the existing footprint of the barn, with extensions limited to being up rather than out. So the barn is shown on the bottom right of this layout plan, together with a detached garage in the centre part of the site and a solar panel array in the top right corner. And these are the proposed elevations. So if you look at the right-hand side elevations, you can see a sort of dotted diagonal line here, and everything above that line is a new extension beyond the shell of the existing building. And these are some plans of a detached garage, which is a pretty low-key functional appearance. So the proposal would conserve a historic building of interest, and the proposed design is considered acceptable and an improvement on the previously refused scheme. In terms of water, the site is served by an existing well which draws water from a separate source to the Arun Valley. Testing has taken place which confirms the quality and quantity of this water would be sufficient for the proposed dwelling. This well, together with water captured from rainwater, would be sufficient to achieve water neutrality. The application is therefore recommended for approval as set out in the report.
Thank you very much. Fine, we'll move on to the speakers if we may. So, Jack Lawrence, you have 2 minutes. Sorry, could you put your speaker on? Just press the button if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
I've lived close to Northlands Barn all of my life, and professionally I work in agriculture, landscape and conservation. This has influenced my scheme. I am looking to restore the barn and retain its agricultural character, appearance and setting. This includes the full restoration of the front and rear elevations and the restoration of the original roof form. The fenestration on the side elevations is modest and rural to the farmyard, which will be retained, as will the walls that enclose it. This scheme will be totally off-grid using a combination of solar and air source heat pump. There will be a plant room in the garage. The farm building is much smaller yet reflective of a previous farm building within the yard. The solar panels will be located with an enclosed former access track which will be turned into a wildflower meadow to attract butterflies and bees. It will be fully screened from the lane and the adjacent fields. The whole site will be water neutral. The site will be served by a well. The water comes from a natural surface water pocket. I'm looking to achieve additional carbon benefits and a 20% biodiversity net gain through traditional landscaping, including broadleaf woodland, hedging, ponds, organic meadows and wildlife boxes. It is extensive and complements the local traditional landscape. I will undertake the work myself with help from local heritage architects and other experts who have helped me bring this scheme together. I am aiming to set a benchmark for sensitive and sustainable conversions locally and nationally. Finally, the scheme and land improvement should, with utilising the water from the well, help towards reducing the flooding issues along Northlands Lane. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Liz Lawrence, could you please come up? Thank you. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is a 16th century farmstead that included a dwelling for over 200 years. It's locally important and located on the edge of a large field and fronts directly onto the lane. The framework allows for isolated homes that secure the future of heritage assets and the reuse of redundant buildings that enhance its immediate setting. Thacombe Neighbourhood Plan attracts full weight as it's part of the development plan. It identifies farmsteads as a strength of the parish and the deterioration of historic environment as a weakness. It allows for the sympathetic residential conversion of traditional farm buildings. In 2020, you refused a conversion scheme by Waits because it was unsympathetic. It extended the footprint of the barn by 55%, removed 60% of the front stone facade, a significant proportion of the cart openings, and failed to retain the barn's original agricultural form, height, proportions, character and appearance. It destroyed its historic identity. However, you raised no objections with regard to principal, location, accessibility or curtilage. With Jack's scheme, significant research has been undertaken to ensure that the proportions, height and form of the original building is restored with no enlargements to it. It has the support of your officers, 2 local heritage architects, ecologists, landscapers, and as concluded by Thacombe Parish Council, the proposal is unobjectionable and includes many elements that are welcome and necessary at this sensitive countryside location. Not only does the scheme fully comply with the framework and the neighbourhood plan, it satisfies environmental and climate change policies at all levels and fully meets Horsham's aspirations relating to climate change. It's a very sensitive scheme that delivers on so many levels. Finally, as the council doesn't have a 5-year supply of housing land, the presumption in favour of allowing the application applies. The proposal fully complies with the policies in the framework as a whole and your recently introduced FAD. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Amanda Avis or Avis? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak in support of the application. I am a keen local historian and have lived close to Northlands Barn for over 36 years. I regularly walk past it and have been saddened to see it at risk of becoming dilapidated. It seems to me that this is a very sensitive conversion that would preserve and enhance an historic building that is currently at risk of becoming a bit of a redundant eyesore. I am very impressed by the historical research that has been undertaken to ensure the scheme is sympathetic to heritage issues. I see that Dr. Caroline Adams, who I knew when she was a senior archivist at West Sussex County Council, has carried out extensive research for the application to ensure it is appropriate for the local area. I have spent some time reading the associated documents and note the following. The scheme has the full support of your senior conservation officer and Thacombe Parish Council, whose parish the barn is located in. It has been designed by a Storrington-based heritage architect and has the full support of another heritage architect who lives in Northlands Lane. The highways and water authorities and your landscape and ecology consultants have not raised any objections. As I understand it, the scheme is totally off-grid and water neutral, and the ecology and landscaping proposals seem sensitive and beneficial to local wildlife. I also understand that the applicant will use local materials and stonemason to help with the works, which must be good news for the local economy. Finally, I note that the applicant has lived close to the barn all his life. We all know how difficult setting up home can be for young people. It is encouraging to think that this self-build conversion would help the council in its ambition to support younger generations continue to live and work in the district. All in all, whenever I read through the associated paperwork, I keep asking myself, what's not to like about this application? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Anna Worthington-Lees, please, from Storrington and Sullington Parish Council. You have 5 minutes.
Although falling within the parish of Thacombe, this site actually bears a closer relation to Storrington than to Thacombe. It is to Storrington that future occupants will look for their services. A previous application was refused in 2020, at which time Thacombe Parish Council objected on the grounds that it creates a new isolated dwelling outside the built-up area boundary. This barn building is at a considerable distance from its home farm. The proposal also remains generally undesirable in terms of creating a new isolated home in the countryside at an unsustainable distance from the nearest facilities. They also considered it was unsustainably located relative to services and amenities. The proposal was then refused on the grounds that the proposed conversion and extension of the building would represent an unsympathetic conversion by reason of its excessive size and scale, which would not retain its agricultural character and would result in an inappropriate form of development in relation to its agricultural setting, contrary to paragraph 79 of the NPPF and policy 9 of the Thacombe Parish Neighbourhood Plan. Although the current proposal is smaller and retains the original footprint of the building, the site has not moved. It remains in open countryside, isolated from other buildings and in an unsustainable location. It is way beyond the built-up area boundary, in open countryside on a single track lane subject to flooding and well used by walkers, riders, etc. It bears no relationship to any other property, and the introduction of an isolated house in this location would suburbanise the area and be totally out of keeping with its countryside location, as with the proposed solar panels in a nearby field. The introduction of domestic paraphernalia, lighting, etc. into the countryside is contrary to the HGPF and would set a precedent for adjacent fields. If the council is minded to permit this application on the grounds that it retains the original footprint, I would ask that consideration be given to removing permitted development rights to ensure that this remains the case and that it is not extended in future, thus negating this thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do the officers wish to come back?
Yeah, just to pick up on a few points. So the paragraph 6.2 of the committee report includes paragraph 80 of the MPPF, which sets out the circumstances where isolated dwellings can be considered acceptable. So the report accepts that this location is isolated, but that's okay because it leads to the future preservation of a non-designated heritage asset, and that therefore weighs in favour of granting planning permission. In terms of the conditions, there's a condition recommended to remove permitted development rights to prevent future enlargements and alterations. That's condition 22. And conditions also recommended for landscaping and biodiversity enhancements. In terms of the previous reason for refusal, it really related to the design of the 2020 scheme, which is on the screen now, which wasn't felt to retain the agricultural character of the building and setting. I think the current application is a significant improvement on that, which as officers we feel addresses that previous reason for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. No? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to the local members. Councillor Blackhall, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The first point I would make on this application is that to rather query the statements made by the chair of the Storrington Parish Council. This is because there's a lack of consistency in this area. Only last year, this committee agreed to a request by the Parish Council for a new build on Rycroft Nurseries, a new build, not an existing site at all. This was on the grounds that the owner of the nursery needed to be close to his enterprise to protect it from damage and theft, no doubt emanating from the travellers' site on Prime Road. This house is now being built in the middle of the countryside in an area which did not have a building before. This request was granted, and I approve this against the officer's advice. What we have decided with this application is to turn an abandoned farm into a well-designed dwelling. This is approved by officers, parish council, and the conversion lies in Thacum, not in Storrington. It is a design that has been adjusted to meet the previous objections. The alternative to this is that another derelict site open to occupation by travellers, possibly from Friar Road and the Wantley Road farm, which is increasingly used for car boot sales, and is only a few hundred yards away from this. This development will protect this area. Also, by clearing this site up, it continues the general improvement to the general area, which started with the demolition of James Brothers' disused dairy farm, which was a huge eyesore and now is on the way to be a tasteful small development of 6 or 7 houses. Also, on the opposite side of the road, there is the planting of a large vineyard by Mr. Stedman of Champions Farm. Both examples of imaginative and ongoing use of agricultural sites at the same time in keeping with the rural setting. All of this is important to Thacum, which it proportionately has taken a greater proportion of development than any other area in the whole district. And that this is another part where it will be able to preserve this area in general for the rural setting that it is now. And on this basis, I would ask the committee to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blackwell. Okay, we're going to now have Councillor Circus.
Thank you, Chairman. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I came across I was having a little discussion with somebody locally who said to me, there's no point in speaking at the planning committee. All the decisions are made before the planning committee meets. I'm sure Emma wishes that was the case. I suddenly, just momentarily, got the urge to come here today and oppose this application vigorously in order to prove how wrong they were, particularly since the individual was actually a candidate in the forthcoming election, which was an added reason for doing it. But seriously, my colleague, Councillor Blackhall, has put the case very well. When we considered this previously, we had a number of objections. I think we have to look kindly on an applicant who has taken seriously the comments that we've made and the reasons why we turned down the application originally. Thacombe Parish Council, as has been said, is solidly support this application. And it seems to me it is a way of preserving our heritage, and that clearly is the view of our heritage officer. I mean, the comment was made about isolated properties. Well, I have to say, if I may, Chairman, going around in this election, I have been stunned, actually, how many isolated properties there are, certainly in my ward. I don't really think it being an isolated property, and it's not actually that isolated compared with some properties. I think it would be right, my view is, to support this application, very much for the reasons that Councillor Blackwell has already given. I wonder, though, in the light of the comments from the chairman of Storrington Parish Council, perhaps the officers could comment on this, whether there is any mileage in removing permitted development rights. That seems to me might support and reinforce the decisions that the applicant has made since we originally turned down the previous application. I don't know whether, Chairman, the officers could. And if they see no reason why not, I'd like to propose that we have such a condition. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to respond to that?
Just to say, Councillor Circus, condition 22 on the last page does remove permitted development rights for this property. Also, 22 conditions for a dwelling is not a small amount of conditions, but I think it reflects obviously the number of the heritage matters, the landscape, the ecology, the removal of permitted development. All those elements are secured in conditions because they are considered to be important to be brought forward as part of this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fine, in that case, we'll open the debate. Does anybody want to? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I can ask a question and then talk a little bit. Off Emma, when I first became a councillor, there was flooding, a real flooding issue on Norton's Lane, and that was due to someone blocking a culvert. One of the comments on the application is from somebody who's concerned about flooding. Are we sure that by sort of putting guttering and hard standings, all that sort of stuff, we're not going to make that situation worse?
Yeah, so basically the approved layout plan shows a package treatment works for fell water treatment and a soakaway for surface water. And I think the details of the soakaway which is in a soft landscape part of the garden, wouldn't increase surface water runoff. So water shouldn't be leaving the site onto Northlands Lane, should be captured and disposed of into the ground on this site. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I think given that we refused this or a similar application, the best part of 3 years ago, and the applicant has spent an inconsiderable amount of time and money coming back and listening to our concerns, changing the application so it matches more of the feedback given at the time, I think shows exactly what we as councillors want, and also as a local authority we want. So I appreciate what Anna has said about the concerns from Storrington, but this is an example of somebody making the effort to make sure that their development is in keeping with the local community, and it is great to see particularly a younger applicant bring this forward, so we'll be supporting it.
Thank you very much. Does any other member have anything to say? Councillor van der Kloot.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to suggest that given that there are to be car parking spaces made available, that's in regulatory condition 21, that there should also be a condition that there should be an electrical vehicle charging point. I don't think there is such a condition at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to that one if we may. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight something and perhaps get some sort of explanation. The first speaker, Mr. Lawrence, spoke very well, but he referred to specifically a 20% biodiversity net gain. Now, that is, I can't see anything in the papers before us referring to a measurement of biodiversity net gain. I can see in section 6 on ecology that a biodiversity net gain assessment has been made, but I can't see anything relating to the particulars of this assessment, and I can't see anything that would be able to measure specifically a 20% biodiversity net gain. Now, I make this point purely because we get too many planning applications, especially from large developers, who blandly reel off these biodiversity net gain figures without providing any kind of statistics or measurements to back them up. Now, I have to say, based on the evidence that I have seen this afternoon, I am minded to join my colleagues and approve this application for all the reasons that have been put before us. However, I am not happy about these bland BNG measurements, which are not referred to in the paperwork, and I've seen nothing that can substantiate this claim. I'm sure there will be biodiversity net gain, and I'm very happy about it, but this has to be stopped. 20% is a figure that everyone seems to gravitate to, and I do not understand why. So perhaps the officers could just explain that for me.
We'll come back to that in a second. Does any other member have anything to say? No.
Sorry, just on biodiversity net gain. I mean, there is an agreed standard that's in the Environment Act, and 20% is what's in the draft local plan. So I don't quite understand what Councillor Knoll's saying.
If a claim is made, Councillor, I'd like to see the statistics to back it up.
Just to say, there is a standard metric, a published metric in terms of biodiversity net gain. It's not yet mandatory, and so I think that's why it's not referenced particularly in the report, because we cannot require it. The requirement for small sites has been pushed back till April next year. So April next year it becomes mandatory that small sites have to provide 10% biodiversity net gain. We don't currently have a policy basis to require that. So whilst it may have been referenced in the supporting speeches, it's not a fundamental point to our assessment of acceptability. That's why it's not detailed within the report. For a condition that requires environmental enhancement, but not specific to that metric. Obviously, when we get to the point where it becomes mandatory, whether that's a policy basis in the local plan or next April when it becomes mandatory, you will see details of that metric, because then that's our policy framework for requiring it. I hope that's helpful.
Councillor Dole. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dole.
Sorry, well, thank you for the explanation, and I do appreciate that, but my point still stands that we should stop being quoted these figures automatically, that a certain percentage will be achieved, whilst it's not being actually measured as part of our conditions.
The solicitor would like to say something.
The ecology section of the report, paragraph 6.21, paragraph 6.23, refers to two documents which have been submitted in support of the application: ecological assessment, ecology solutions, and the walkover ecology update and biodiversity net gain assessment. And those have both been assessed by the advisor to the planning department on the ecology. So I'm just wondering if you've looked at those.
Yes, I did look at them, but nevertheless, my point is that there's no measurement here. So how can we accept these measurements which are given to us as part of the evidence? That's my only point.
Unfortunately, we can't refine the answer.
I know.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dole.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points, really. In 6.3, it refers to Policy 9 of the Thacombe Neighbourhood Plan. And about halfway down that paragraph, it says these criteria include a proposal being confined to the existing area of farm buildings, constructive and vernacular material, not including inappropriate or insensitive conversion works, and not resulting in a significant increase in the existing building footprint or height. Do we know, just for reference, what the increase is in the overall dimensions of the building as a percentage? Because I'm just interested on how, because we've got it in there as this is being supported, but there does seem to be something in the Thacombe Neighbourhood Plan which says as long as it's not too big. I'm just wondering how much bigger this is. It's obviously 2 floors rather than 1 floor.
So if you look at the top left drawing is the existing east elevation, and the eaves level on this drawing here is as existing. So on this elevation, the increase in height is limited to the new roof form.
Yeah, so do we know the percentage?
I haven't got a percentage for you, no. No, but you can see from this drawing, from ground level to eaves level, in comparison to eaves level to ridge height. So at the back of the building, because it's like a monopitched roof going down, the increase is greater than that at the front, because they're reinstating the original eaves line of the building.
Yeah, so it is a substantial increase in height, isn't it?
It is, yeah. In order to create a traditional barn form, they have to increase the height.
Okay, so it does seem to me that we're actually not actually in accord with 6.3, with Policy 9. Policy 9 is being used heavily as the basis for supporting this. The other question, which is purely a matter of my not understanding, on 6.4, the barn represents a non-designated heritage asset. It then goes on to say, which with reference to its character, quality and vernacular is deemed worthy of conversion. Is that actually a definition of non-designated heritage asset, or is that an interpretation of what this one is? Just a question.
Yes, a non-designated heritage asset would be anything of historic interest which isn't listed or within a conservation area. So a traditional 18th century building, a barn, which isn't listed on a conservation area, would be a non-designated heritage asset. So it still has policy weight in terms of wanting to conserve it because it is of historic interest. It's just not designated in and of itself.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other member got anything to say? Can I go back just to local members? And do you want to add anything? No? Okay.
There's an outstanding question.
Oh, yes. An outstanding question for Councillor Bannister about the putting an electric charging point.
Yeah, so at present we did think about including that as a condition for electric charging point, but we've had some issues for rural houses where there's not been enough power in the grid to actually provide a charging point. And because this application is coming forward as an off-grid dwelling, we weren't sure there'd be enough charge potential at the site to accommodate an electric vehicle.
Councillor Vandercliffe, do you want to come back on that?
Well, I think that the logical conclusion from that is that the site isn't really very sustainable, is it? If you can't use electric vehicles to get to and from it.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. If I might come back on that point, I think the fact that you can't charge at home doesn't mean that you're not adopting a sustainable lifestyle. I don't fill my petrol car up at home. I'm not sure you don't either, Councillor. I think that's a bit of a red herring, I'm afraid. Whether there's merit in putting a charging point in now with the assumption that there may be enough electricity generated there to cope with an electric vehicle, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
If I could just come
Yes.
back on to Councillor Croker, it doesn't take me, I don't know, 20 hours to fill my car with diesel or petrol.
Councillor Clark.
For what it's worth, chipping in, they've got a solar panel array in an export field. Surely it's just a question of putting in a battery and calculating exactly how much power you can draw off the solar panels, and then you can at least do some charging if you put in a charge point, not necessarily all. I have solar panels at home. I'd have no problem charging an electric car if I wanted to have one from my solar panels, for what it's worth.
Councillors were happy to add a condition relating to electric powering. Thank you.
Okay. In that case, we'll move on to the recommendation. The recommendation to approve the application subject to completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure off-site water neutrality, offsetting measures and the conditions set out in paragraph 10 of the report. And also to include... Was it not?
Just to approve planning commission.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies to everybody. Sorry. This is...
Condition.
Okay. Okay, sorry. The recommendation to approve planning permission subject to appropriate conditions and the addition of the electrical vehicle installation. So, can I have a show of hands, those for the recommendation? Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Just to confirm, we had all 13 votes for the application, so it's been approved subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My apologies for reading out the wrong recommendation. This is what comes with producing a script. Anyway, okay, we'll move on to item 7, which is SDNP /2103962-FUL. And before we move on to that, can I ask Carl Conroy, please, to move up to the table to make his representation? Is he here? Is Carl Conroy here? Oh, okay. Richard Murray, well, perhaps you could come up to the table, please. Thank you. Fine, item 7 then is the SDNP /21/03962/FUL. This is for the change of use of a former light industrial building to a holiday let. Can you have the officer presentation, please?
Thank you. Since this committee report was published, a further 7 representations have been received, raising concerns which reflect those set out in section 5 of the report. The application relates to a site within the South Downs National Park, with a site identified by the red star on this map, and the built-up area called Horsham in blue to the south. The site contains an existing building accessed off Church Lane, with the application proposing its conversion to a holiday let. So these are some photos of the existing building, which was granted planning permission in 2020 for the external timber cladding. The proposed conversion will entail alterations to external fenestration, with the elevations also showing an increase in height of around 0.5 metres within the overall existing form. And these are the proposed floor plans, which essentially propose a 2-bedroom unit of accommodation. Although in a countryside location, the South Downs local plan doesn't in principle preclude holiday accommodation in such locations, and it's essentially a judgment as to whether the specifics of the site are suitable for use as holiday accommodation. In this case, the site isn't isolated or remote, being adjoined by housing and in close proximity to the built-up area of Coldwater. There are also public footpaths in the vicinity of the site, which would allow for access into the national park. These factors are considered on balance to lend themselves to supporting holiday accommodation on this site. In terms of impact on neighbours, the scale and separation distances between the building and neighbouring properties is considered sufficient to prevent any unacceptable harm. A water statement has been submitted, which demonstrates that increased usage from a holiday let can be offset through identified efficiencies at an existing property in Rusper. This would be secured by Section 106 agreement to ensure water neutrality. The application is therefore recommended for approval as set out in the report.
Thank you very much. Fine, we'll move to speakers. Mr. Conroy, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I am a neighbour who lives at the Retreat, which is a neighbouring property, and I speak in full opposition to the application. For the record, there are 8 other neighbouring residents also in opposition and none in favour of the application. There are too many opposing reasons to address in 2 minutes, but the more concerning ones are: the site plan for the application is misleading and wrong, including showing the access track across a neighbouring property, Roseview. The access track is to the front and only serves one other property, Woodlands. The plan of the new dwelling contains several inaccuracies in measurements, description and layout. The site covered by the application, including the proposed building, is landlocked, I repeat, landlocked, and there is no legal access to it. The access track is owned by a neighbouring property, Roseview, and there is no agreement in place which would allow legal access to the old mechanics workshop. Access can only be by trespass. An illegal water supply has been installed in the old mechanics shed, again across a neighbouring property, Roseview, without permission. This does not lend credibility for the water neutrality arrangement. St. James Primary School has expressed serious safeguarding concerns for their very young pupils, which could arise if the application was granted. The school is just yards from the mechanic shed. I really find it very difficult to understand how the application can be supported in the above circumstances. In view of the overall opposition to the application from surrounding residents, I urge the committee to reject it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right, Mr. Richard Murray, the agent, please. Mr. Murray, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The proposed development comprises the reuse of an existing light industrial building to a holiday let. The building has been valued as a commercial use by the council recently. On the ground floor, the building will provide a kitchen dining room with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. On the first floor, within the roof space, a lounge area will also be provided. The layout of the remaining of the site will remain unchanged. Parking will take place to the side of the building, while a new soft landscaping scheme is proposed for the remaining land of the site. The landscaping will incorporate a new pond and significant areas of wildflower planting to provide biodiversity. The external appearance of the building will be greatly enhanced from the existing, and the use of timber cladding with new doors, windows will complete the external appearance of the building. The existing building has no architectural merit and arguably detracts from the surroundings. It's considered that the proposal will enhance the appearance of the building, and in doing so, make a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the site. The site is accessed by a shared private way, which links to the public highway at Church Lane, and Highways officers have raised no objection to the scheme. Although a private matter, which must sit outside the planning assessment, it can be confirmed that the application building has a full legal right of access to use the shared private way, and this has been confirmed to the council officers. The building has historically been used as a light industrial use. The proposed conversion of the building to a holiday let will result in the use of lower overall environmental impact on the surrounding area and will be more in keeping with the surrounding residential setting. The building is set on a spacious plot and as a result would not impact on any neighbouring properties by way of overlooking or overshadowing. Policy SD23 provides broad support for sustainable tourism facilities outside the settlement policy boundaries. The site is located within a small sustainable village which has a public house and excellent accessibility to several key strategic public rights of way that will allow visitors to increase their awareness, understanding and enjoyment of the National Park's special qualities. This is a key consideration of Policy SD23 and the proposals comply entirely with the purposes of this policy. The application is seeking to provide a long-term use for a redundant building that is sustainably located for tourism accommodation.
Can you conclude now, please?
Yeah. It's clear from the submitted plans and consultee responses and officer report that the application accords with the relevant local and national planning policies, and I kindly ask committee members to grant consent for the application.
Thank you. Can we go back?
Just to comment that the ownership of land isn't a planning consideration, but in terms of the access from Church Lane, the applicant has advised that they have a deed of easement which gives right of access to the site, which we don't have any reason to dispute as part of this application.
Thank you very much. Right, in that case, we'll go to Councillor van der Kloot, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just had a few questions to ask to clarify a few matters in the report. And the first question is, I understand the application is to convert the existing building and for change of use to a holiday letting. What use class is a holiday letting?
So a holiday let is basically a dwelling. So it's a Class C3 dwelling, and it's the condition attached to the permission which restricts it to holiday lets. There is no distinction between a dwelling and a holiday let other than the condition.
Thank you. So it's the same use class as a dwelling, C3. Thank you. So the only thing that would prevent it being converted into a dwelling would be removing the condition. Looking at the plan at page 45 of our bundle, there was a reference by the first speaker to the plans being inaccurate. This is the plan with Horsham District Council's name at the top and the planning application number. Is that plan correct?
So that plan wasn't part of the application. It's generated as part of the committee agenda. So the plan submitted the application is the one on the screen now, which shows the access of Church Lane. So it's this plan which would form part of the approved plans list on a decision notice.
So, thank you for clarifying that. So it is an inaccurate plan, the one at page 45, and you know, it's not very helpful for the committee to have an inaccurate plan. The building that we're dealing with is actually to the north of the access route and not to the south, shown on this plan. And the building is also much smaller than the building that's shown on this plan. I can't see the point of putting before the committee an inaccurate plan.
I think the purpose of the plans we have on our agendas is so members can locate the site. Obviously, the application should always be determined on the basis of the plans submitted as part of the planning application, which are on public access and obviously which my colleague has gone through today. So these plans are generated from our GIS system, so they don't take plans from the application itself, and that's always been the case since I've worked here. I recognise your point, Councillor Van der Kloot, but I'm just explaining how we generate these plans and how that just is a kind of an aid memoir if members want to visit the site, etc., so you can identify where it is. It doesn't have any basis of the assessment of the planning application, which are the plans that my colleague has shown you today. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very helpful explanation. So I think we can bear in mind in future that we shouldn't rely on the plans for being accurate. On page 33 of the report, it says, paragraph 1, that the building is, this notification relates to a small timber frame structure sited 25 metres west of the dwelling of Woodlands. Is that correct, or should it be to the east?
Yeah, it should be to the east.
Thank you. And in the next paragraph, the building is located at the westernmost extent of a shared private way with the dwelling of Woodlands and several dwellings to the west and northwest. Should that be the east and northeast?
Well, yeah, northeast and west, I suppose, yeah, as you can see from the slide plan.
East and northeast.
Yeah.
If we look at page 43, this is called Appendix 1, and it says site location map. Is that plan also wrong, or is it correct?
So Appendix 1 is also produced by the council in the template reports. It's not part of the application documents. So Appendix 1 is essentially the same as the map on page 45.
So it is wrong.
It's because...
Thank you. If we turn to page 39, we've got at paragraph 10, reasons for, heading reasons for recommendation and conditions. Incidentally, I note that there are no reasons given, it just goes straight into the conditions. However, the conditions listed in the event that the application is approved, state at condition 2, this is the one I want to focus on, the development hereby permitted should be carried out in accordance with the plans listed below under the heading plans referred to in consideration of this application. And this is for the avoidance of doubt in the interests of proper planning. Now, those plans are referred to at page 44 in Appendix 2. So if we look at page 44 in Appendix 2, those are the approved plans if the application is permitted. The first plan is the location and block plan reference 001 version Rev P1, and that was received on the 11th of October 2021. However, an amended location and block plan was submitted on the 8th of December in 2021. I have compared the differences between those two plans, and the difference is that the later plan, the one submitted in December, purports to show some enhancement of nature and wildlife. So that at least makes some attempt to make proposals for enhancement of biodiversity as required by Strategic Policy SD9. And so I would have thought that it would have been preferable for the approved plan to be the second plan rather than the first plan. Would you agree with that?
So the purpose of listing the site location plan is to identify the application site within red. So the decision will relate to the red line of the site. In terms of biodiversity enhancement, condition 4 of the recommendation requires further details in any case, because you need more detail than annotation on a plan to show what planting is. You need to know what type of planting, the specifications for wetlands future maintenance. So condition 4 is the means of securing ecosystem services and biodiversity enhancements, not the approved location plan.
Right, so we can really ignore the enhancement of biodiversity on the second plan.
You can take it that condition of 4 with secure details of it.
It's dealt with by condition 4, thank you. The next approved plan in Appendix 2 is the existing and proposed floor plan and elevation plans. And I've got 2 points to make there. I think it can be clearly seen with the naked eye that the proposed elevations are taller than the existing elevations, and I think the officer did mention that in his introduction, that it's 0.5 metres higher, the proposed elevation from the existing elevation, 0.5 metres, I think you mentioned. So presumably that is to make room for a mezzanine level, which does not exist in the original building. However, if we look at the design and access statement, which is the third approved document in Appendix 2, this states at page 13, and I quote, "The proposed development comprises the reuse of an existing building with no additional built form proposed." And further down the same page, on page 13, it says no new built development is proposed, so the scale of development relates entirely to the existing built form. And our own planning report of paragraph 37, paragraph 2, states, and I quote, that the proposal entails the conversion of an existing building with only limited alterations to fenestration. But that's not correct, is it? Because if we look at the proposed elevation plans, and as the officer said in the introduction, the building is to be enlarged. And I think the point is that it is important to be clear whether the building is to be enlarged, as this does give rise to other planning issues, such as the impact on neighbouring amenity in relation to policy South Downs 31, given the increased height and the fenestration, which would be higher, and that shown particularly on the eastern elevation, which is the elevation that looks across to neighbouring properties. And it also gives rise to issues regarding design, character and appearance. So I think this is all quite misleading, really. The second point I wanted to make about that was that an amended version of this plan was submitted in December 2021, which shows some changes in fenestration. But again, that is not the approved plan. It's not the one referred to in Appendix 2. The approved plan is the earlier plan. And was that an oversight? Or is it really intended that it's the earlier plan that is approved?
I think we'll confirm that, Councillor Van Cleef. What I would say is, obviously, these are the extensive points you're raising here. It would obviously have been incredibly helpful for officers if you had raised these before the meeting, so we could have spent the time rather than seeking to find answers on the spot. But bear with us a second, we'll see if we can answer that final point for you. In terms of the design and access statement, it's not normally the case that we would have that. I think that's been erroneously pulled through from our IT system. We wouldn't normally list a design and access statement as an approved document. It's generally just the plans, or if you've got anything in relation to ecology, etc. The design and access statement generally just provides the evolution of how they've reached that design. It wouldn't be something that we would ordinarily approve. And sometimes we do unfortunately find points in design and access statements that perhaps aren't accurate. But it's the plans which are the basis for your decision making, which obviously we've had the comparison on the screen, and my colleague has detailed in terms of that half a metre height difference. Thank you.
Thank Councillor Klute, if I can interject here as well. I don't know about others, but I'm getting a bit confused with what your points are. So Can you try and conclude as to
Yes.
why you
Well-
don't approve this application, please?
Yes, I will, Chairman. I'm sorry that it seems to be rather long-winded, but I can only deal with the application that's before me. And if I had all the time in the world, I would have come, earlier and spoken to the planning department. But, it isn't really very satisfactory that we have to make a decision on documents that are inconsistent and say things that don't appear necessarily to be very coherent or accurate. And that's just the point I'm making. If I could move on to...
Well, could you just perhaps, if you wouldn't mind, just to
Yes.
conclude now?
Yes.
Because you had nearly 10 minutes. So
I just
could we-
wanted to clarify those points, and now I'd like to make my
yes, you
my
can just make your
comments. So
final statement. Thank you.
on the question of design, it seems to me that this building is totally unsuited for use as a residential dwelling, albeit restricted to a holiday let. In the strategic policy, SD5 says that development proposals will only be permitted where, and I quote, they adopt a sensitive and high quality design that makes a positive contribution to the overall character and appearance of the area. And I think we can see from the photograph that that can hardly be said of the proposals for conversion of this building. What may be suitable for an outbuilding or industrial building is far from being appropriate for a residential dwelling. The cladding does not respect the local built character, which is largely brick. As a residence, the design is all wrong and not policy compliant. Indeed, the design and access statement itself underlines this by stating that, and I quote, the existing building has no architectural merit and arguably detracts from its surroundings. On the question of conservation and enhancement of wildlife, the officer's report states at the top of page 39 that the nature and siting of the proposal is such that there would be no adverse impact on protected species or habitat. But that really misses the point of core policy SD2, which requires that all planning applications should be accompanied by a statement that sets out how the development proposal impacts both positively and negatively on ecosystem services, i.e. on the benefits we get from the natural world. And that policy, SD2, is described as a core policy in the local plan, and it provides the overarching framework for evaluation of all developments in the national park. Similarly, strategic policy SD9 requires that prior to determination, up-to-date ecological information should be provided which identifies and incorporates opportunities for biodiversity net gain. There's no proper compliance with this. There are just a few vague paragraphs in the design and access statement, and there is reference on the revised location and block plan to planting, but as we said, that is not effective. On the question of meeting the needs for sustainable tourism, the location is not suitable for tourist accommodation, as public transport is very restricted. The development will be outside the settlement boundary of Cold Horsham and does not positively contribute to the natural beauty, wildlife and cultural heritage of the park, which it would have to do in order to comply with policy SD23. Holidaymakers have a very different lifestyle from permanent residents, and there is a real possibility of loss of tranquility in contravention to strategic policy SD7, given the close proximity of this building to neighbouring buildings. The head of St James's CFE Primary School, which is only about 50 metres away, and other members of the community have raised concerns about a holiday let being located so close to the school. This would introduce numerous strangers to the community, which would be a safeguarding threat to the very young children. I think that is a material consideration to bear in mind for planning. On the question of the risk of ground contamination, given the alleged prior industrial use, Environmental Health advised that the applicant should provide a preliminary risk assessment to ensure the application is properly determined, and I can't see that that's being provided. On the question of showing water neutrality, and this is my last point, Chairman, the water neutrality statement accepts that the building does not have any current water usage, so the baseline is 0. It is calculated that the required 107.46 litres per day would be offset by retrofitting another property owned by the applicant, which is a 7-bedroomed property south of the village of Rusper. However, the water saving calculation is based on 4 people living there. This makes the calculation unreliable and unacceptable, as there's plenty of spare capacity in terms of accommodation in a 7-bedroom house for the number of occupants there to increase by casual visitors and permanent occupants. So that is not a satisfactory statement. I shall listen carefully to what other members of the committee have to say, but at the moment I'm very hesitant of approving an application which leaves much to be desired in terms of compliance with the South Down local plan policies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question for officers. In my limited experience on planning, if a commercial or an industrial unit comes up and is empty and you want to convert it to a different use, from memory, I thought you had to prove that you had tried to market it and tried to either get somebody else to take it on as a commercial or industrial building for a certain period of time. So the question to officers is, has this been done and have you got proof?
We don't have any evidence the building has been marketed. As part of that, we were basing it on our previous assessment of the use of the building. So we had a prior approved application there in 2020, I believe, which was trying to argue it's in light industrial use and therefore benefited from the PD change to a dwelling house. And we refused the application because we didn't believe it was in commercial use. We thought the use had been abandoned during, it had been vacant for so long. So because of that ambiguity in terms of the existing lawful use of the building, at the time we recommended they submit a lawful development certificate. We recommended they apply for a lawful development certificate to establish the use of the building. Because it's so ambiguous in terms of what the lawful use is, we didn't progress the loss of a potential loss of commercial space as part of this application.
Yeah, but I'm a bit dumb here because this building has been assessed for commercial rates by Horsham District Council. So either it is or it ain't, but it can't be both.
Yeah, I mean, a business rate valuation wouldn't equate to a lawful planning use. The two don't necessarily relate to one another.
Thank you. I don't follow that logic, but I hear what you say. Save time, basically. Much of what my colleague has said applies. And when I look, for example, at the building, which I know well, having been canvassing around there, and I know the area like the back of my hand, for me, it fails under the heading of NPPF 12. It's not a well-designed building. That may be a subjective valuation on my part, but moving away from that, in my opinion, it doesn't fit with SD5, as my colleagues already said. I also fail to see how it lines up with NPPF 15. It's not attractive, despite what is said in paragraph 4, page 37. But I mean, officers already said it's an unattractive building as it exists. For me, it doesn't. I look at the link to sustainable tourism, and I see the link to sustainable tourism extremely weak. Waltham is a lovely place. It's got a super pub called The Labouring Man, absolutely fantastic food, no advertising, but there's nothing else in the village. There's no post office except twice a week. There's no other shops there at this point in time, and the bus service is poor, to say the least. So in terms of sustainable access, you have to have a car, be it electric or otherwise, it doesn't matter, but you have to have a form of transport to get there. Now, there might be a lack of tourist accommodation in the South Downs Park, and that's fine. But the policy, which is outlined in the planning report, says that South Downs Way is mentioned. Well, this property is nowhere near the South Downs Way. Nowhere near. It's a long way away from it. It's not like it's in Storrington or somewhere like that. And yes, there are footpaths around, because I know them well. But these footpaths cross the River Rother and the Arun floodplain, and down south go across Amberley Wirebrooks. So maybe for 6 months of the year, the tourism is there, but 6 months of the year, you've got waders or you're drowning because it's all flooded. So the tourism thing I see as being quite weak, I'm afraid. I don't think it complies with SD 25. I don't think it meets the test of SD 23. Because inter alia, it doesn't encourage subsequent travel by sustainable means. You have to have a car to get there. And if you want to access the South Downs Way, you either have to be a jolly fit cyclist or a very fast walker to get up on the South Downs and come back. So I don't think it fits really the planning policies of the South Downs National Park, I'm afraid. So unless somebody convinces me differently and the speakers that will follow, I'm not happy with this one. And I do agree it does fit with SD 23D, but that's about it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do officers want to come back on anything else?
Yeah, if I just pick up on some of the more general points that have been raised. In terms of ecosystem services, condition 4 recommendation would address that. Contamination is condition 3. In terms of tranquility, I think it would be difficult to argue that one dwelling in use as a holiday accommodation surrounded by similar dwellings would result in a loss of tranquility. So I think the key issues have to be the location of the site, whether that is suitable for holiday accommodation, and the design of the building. I think the other matters raised can be addressed through condition or wouldn't cause unacceptable harm. In terms of the location of the site, the majority of the applications we get for holiday lets are in the countryside, and you are striking a balance between the kind of negative aspects of the location against the benefits of providing holiday accommodation for tourists. I think in this site, it's a judgment as to whether the footpath links are sufficient to accommodate a holiday let. As officers, we feel it is, but we do appreciate there are limitations within that.
Thank you very much.
Can I just come back on one point?
Yes, fine.
Thank you. With regard to condition 4, which is, as you said, the condition requiring ecosystem services, the local plan, the South Downs local plan, is quite clear that the statement about ecosystem services has to be accompany the application. So, it can't be dealt with by condition. It has to be, before that with the application.
Yeah, so the policy seeks to front load it and get a document at the point of submission, but as officers, there's no reason why we can't get information by condition. So we wouldn't look to refuse an application for a reason we can address by condition. It's an argument, but it's in some respects it's a pointless one because you can get the information you need by condition.
But that may be too late because we may have given permission and then it's not properly carried out. We would want to know before we give our permission as a committee that we've got that ecosystem services, what promises as to what is going to be done.
Thank you very much. Do any other members want to make any comments on this application? Councillor Dawn.
Just a question really, Chairman. On point 3, relevant planning history, there's one dated the 30th of September 2020, prior approval refused. Was that for a technical reason, or is there more that you can tell us about that, please?
It was refused because we didn't believe the building was in light industrial use and didn't benefit from the permitted change of use. So it was a prior approval to convert a light industrial use into a building, and that's permitted development subject to getting our prior approval for certain technical limitations. We didn't feel the building was light industrial, so it didn't benefit from that permitted change of use.
But we've not heard that the council tax is being paid on the basis that it is an industrial unit.
We felt that use had been abandoned because it hadn't been used for a prolonged period of time. So we didn't feel it was in commercial, meaningful light industrial use.
So it's not. So we're not saying it's a light industrial building at all. Then we're just saying it's a shed or something.
Yeah, we think it's ambiguous. So the description of the application is based on the application form, which referred to light industrial use, and we don't have powers to change that.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Nunn?
Thank you, Chair. This is a question as well, based on water neutrality. I'm very sceptical personally of offsetting strategies that are put forward to us, both in terms of water neutrality and, you may be surprised to hear, BNG. However, this is to do with water neutrality. I understand that this is going to be offset, the water supply to this resident is going to be offset by a change to the appliances in a house in Rusper. I can see from the condition 6 that the development shall not be occupied until evidence has been submitted to and approved in writing by the LPA that the approved water neutrality strategy has been implemented in full. Now, Rusper is some distance away from Coldwater. Who is going to be checking this? How is it going to be checked? And how can it be proved? Because I just don't understand how it's going to be done. Could you please explain?
So because the property water use will be offset against is outside the application site, it needs to be a Section 106 agreement. So it's a Section 106 agreement which will provide the means to secure and enforce the efficiencies at the existing property. So condition 6 is about making sure the water strategy is implemented for the proposed holiday let in terms of rainwater harvesting and the efficiencies, and to get the Part G calculator. Yeah, so the recommendation is subject to completion of the 106 agreement to secure the efficiencies on the existing property, with condition 6 relating to the application site only.
Oh, it only refers to the application site.
Yeah, we
can not the offsetting site.
No, we can only impose conditions and enforce conditions on an application site. If anything's off-site, which we need to happen, it has to be through 106 agreement.
So you're not going to be able to check the offsetting site? Is that what you're saying?
No, not at all. The 106 gives us the power to enforce the water efficiency measures, not the conditions. It's the 106 agreement which gives us the comfort that we can ensure water neutrality, basically.
Councillor Noel, if you look at the recommendation on page 33, I think that covers the points you're saying. So the recommendation, as my colleague said, is that the legal agreement will secure off-site water neutrality measures, and that will provide the ability to secure them and enforce them as part of the legal agreement. So it's a general principle of planning, as my colleague said. Anything that you need off-site, outside of the application site, you can't do by condition. You have to do by a legal agreement. And so this principle is established through water neutrality, and it's the same principle with this application as to how those off-site measures in Rusper would be secured if permission were to be granted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma, for explaining that. It hasn't reduced my scepticism, but at least I understand it now, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noel. Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to pick up on the water neutrality thing again. I take Councillor Vanderkluit's point about the offsetting dwelling having 7 bedrooms, which I think has not actually been tested at all yet in terms of water neutrality offsetting. Maybe I'm wrong on that, so I would appreciate some officer comments on that, because the calculations I've seen so far go up to 4 bedrooms, where there's an agreed occupancy ratio, but I haven't seen anything for 7 bedrooms. And is 4 a reasonable number or not? Thank you.
Yeah, so the water neutrality on the offsetting property was based on actual occupation and water bills. So it was based on actual consumption that we knew was happening. We don't have any occupancy data for larger dwellings, and because of that we can't prove that occupancy exponentially increases the bedrooms. So in this case, the bills we have, based on 4-person occupancy of a 7-bedroom house, is based on actual usage, not potential possible future usage. Is actually what's being used. So if anything, it's less than could be used from the full occupation of a 7-bedroom house, which is precautionary enough to work water neutrality back from.
Yes, I think I appreciate that. Problems we've got with that. I think I've had discussions with vendor development before about this. I think it's I share Councillor Knowles' point. It's, we're uncomfortable with it. I don't think fair to say. Thank you.
Any other member? Councillor Circus.
Can I say I'm concerned at this continuing problem of the accuracy of the plans. We had, some of you will remember, we had an application in my ward relating to the hours of opening of the BP garage on the A24. And the plans that were tendered with the officer's report did not show a housing development that had taken place and was directly opposite the BP garage and directly affected. And it seems to me this is really not at all satisfactory. I cannot believe that members can't be given an accurate plan with the officer's report. And if it is not possible to give an accurate plan with the officer's report, then I think we need some sort of caveat to say that this plan is not necessarily accurate. And I think, within a very short time, we will be giving, there will be planning training for new councillors and returning councillors. And I think if we can't do something about the accuracy of these plans, we've got to warn members to be a little bit sceptical about the plans that are attached to these reports. I really think we've got to do that, because I don't think members generally understand what Councillor van der Kloot has discovered, what I discovered on the BP garage application, that sometimes these plans, which can be quite influential in terms of the decision we make as a committee, aren't necessarily accurate. I think we've got to deal with that one way or another. Thank you, Chairman.
I think Councillor Sex has been well explained by Emma as to the discrepancies between the plans that were shown in the documents and the actual planning application. I'm sure she can add some other things to what I've just said, but I think this is something, as we're coming to the end of this term, that should be brought forward to the next council meeting. I have certain sympathy with that, in the sense that I do think that councillors should have plans that they can fully understand, and maybe those can be brought forward from the application, then attached to documents. But there may be issues regarding that, so I don't know if you want to make a comment now or leave that till now.
I think, Councillor Circus, there's a difference here between the plans you have before you, which are from our internal GIS system, which are essentially ordnance survey plans. So they're just drawn off of a map just to identify where the site is, and the plans you consider as part of the planning application, which are the ones submitted by the applicant and the agent. So there's a difference there. The plans we've shown you on the screens today are the plans which should form part of your assessment, and those that submitted as part of the planning application. I've been here quite a long time now at Horsham, and it's always been the case that they've been the ordnance survey plans, but we're at a point now where I think we need to review what we're doing. We've got an opportunity to do that going forward. So it's certainly something I will take away. I acknowledge your point. I have some sympathy and understanding with that. I think just because it's been that way for a period of time doesn't mean we can't review it, and doesn't mean we can't make it clearer going forward for whoever comes into the new administration. So I will certainly take that away today. Thank you.
That's a good point. Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Sorry, Chairman, just a question, especially as we've got a legal person here. Basically, water neutrality, as I understood it, was that you had to guarantee in perpetuity that you would not use more water for a new planning application than what happens before. I'm expressing myself badly, but I think you get the gist. I mean, in this particular planning application, we've had, yeah, it's a 7-bedroom house with 4 people in it, fine, got that, understood that, and so we're setting it against this potential Airbnb or whatever it is, based on 4 people. But that's not in perpetuity, because as was explained, it's done on 4 people that are occupying it, even though 7 people could occupy it. But the flip side of that is you've got no guarantee that the 4 people are going to occupy it forever. Is there not a problem there on the legal side, which I just mention, and I leave it to our legal colleagues to think about? Thank you, Chairman.
I think it's something we'll pick up in planning training, because there's a difference between certainty and absolute certainty, and they are different tests in planning. But I think it's perhaps one for member training. Once we get in past the elections, we can certainly pick that up.
We've got 2 lawyers here, I just pointed out.
Thank you. Any other member want to? Yes, of course.
Isn't it the case that the water neutrality statement is submitted to Metro England and they approve it? Yes. Sorry.
Comments.
They provide their comments as part of the consideration, but it's a fair point in terms. But also, there's another big question over what is perpetuity, because perpetuity in planning is, and these are matters that I'm picking up right now. So what I would say that I think it's a detailed discussion. I think we probably need to have outside of this meeting.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the officers for explaining, and I would just say that consultation is not the same as approval.
Right answer.
Yes.
3 quick comments. First of all, each one is submitted to Metro England, so if they had any objections, they would say so. Secondly, the part of the in perpetuity is the legal agreement, which does ensure that the measures that have been agreed do stay in place forever. And the third comment is that sometimes, all the time you have to be reasonable, sometimes you have to take an average and a median. So in the same way as a house which currently has 4 occupiers could potentially have 7, equally, if they could go down to 1 or 2. So no doubt the people that have compiled the statement and the people that have been consulted on it have taken a reasonable approach as to what is reasonable to be offered and to be accepted. And my point is that, you could go down to 1 occupier, or you could go up down to 7. So 4 is somewhere in the middle, isn't it?
Okay. Thank you for that. Any other member got? Oh, sorry, Kate. Sorry, Councillor
Are you saying that that this house, this 7-bedroom house, 6-bedroom house, cannot be sold in case it's bought by a family with 5 teenagers?
It doesn't matter whether it's sold or not, because the legal agreement effectively places a land charge on that property, which means those measures would have to stay in place even if it were sold, so that the legal agreement stays with the land rather than any owners of that property.
So 3 people can't go to the loo then? I mean, this is ridiculous.
No, it's not.
No, the legal agreement sets out the measures that have been agreed, reflecting the water neutrality statement, the measures that have to be done to make the end result 0 water neutral. So, for example, retrofitting the loo systems or changing the flow of water to the taps. So the legal agreement won't have any restriction on the occupiers. The mention of the occupiers was just to answer the concern about before you get to the legal agreement, the mathematical assessment. Your colleagues on the committee have been concerned that this house potentially it's got 7 bedrooms. So when you're looking at the current usage compared with future usage, they were concerned about that, because they know that there's only 4 occupiers at the moment. But the planning officer answered that. He said that actually it's quite a good assessment in this particular case, because you've got certainty, because the bills and all this, sometimes we don't get that. So it's quite good to get you've got the cast iron guarantee of what the current usage is in order to make the correct assessment.
The bills that have been paid in the past, if the house is sold, will not be the bills that are being paid in the future.
We have to make a reasonable assessment on the basis of the information before us. Obviously, we've got evidence to demonstrate that case. So I think we have to take a view, and we think the view is reasonable. It's based on our FAQs. It's based on the the way in which we assess water neutrality across the whole water resource zone. And obviously it's been supported by Natural England, and obviously earlier on we sought legal advice on that. So we're confident there's an evidence base to demonstrate that. And I think, and that's what's before you really, and obviously officers are recommending approval. Thank you.
I think there is an issue here about water neutrality that some of us may not quite understand. I'm not sure that I do 100%. So this is something, again, perhaps you could take forward and in your training make sure that it's as clear as we can make it. Thank you very much. Any other member want to? No? Okay, in that case, then we'll move on to the recommendation, which hopefully I've got it right this time. It is to approve the application subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure off-site water neutrality offsetting measures and the conditions set out in paragraph 10 of the report. So can I have all those in favour of the recommendation, please? Okay. All those against? And all those abstaining?
Okay, so the voting has gone for, there are 2 votes for, 9 against and 2 abstentions. Therefore, the application has not been approved.
Okay. Okay. So would perhaps one of the local members put forward a proposal as to why it is being refused, please?
Well, Chairman, thank you. I'd like to move an alternative motion to refuse the application as failing to meet the requirements of policies SD5, which is up on design, SD2 and SD9 on biodiversity, and SD23 on sustainable tourism, and SD7 tranquility. I may not have phrased that very well, but those are the policies that I think it doesn't comply with.
Does everybody understand the motion that's been put forward? Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Clark. So all those in favour of the motion that's just been put forward, can you raise your hands, please? All those against? One, I think. Okay, all those abstaining?
Okay, so we had 10 voting for, 1 against, 2 abstentions, and so therefore the motion has been passed.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 8, urgent business. There is none, but I'd just like to say, because this is the last meeting before we go to the elections, that I have to say it's been a privilege to chair this committee, and I would like to thank you, or to take the opportunity to thank you all for the way in which you've determined these applications, and similarly to thank the officers for all their support and guidance. Also to members, we have our last council meeting next week, and we will be having, I think, a farewell get-together after the meeting, so if you could take that on board. Councillor Circus.
You beat me to it. I was going to suggest a vote of thanks to you as chairman, and for the excellent way in which you've handled so fairly and professionally this committee. Unless my arithmetic is faulty, which is quite possible, there's only 7 members around this table today who will actually be standing again. And of course, it may well be that not all of those, elections being what they are, will necessarily be returning in the new council. And I think we should say a big thank you to all those who are standing down for the, it's not the easiest committee to be part of, planning. and representing the interests of members. Sometimes it is pretty hard graft, and all the members here have done sterling work, and I think we should record our thanks particularly to those who won't be standing on May the 4th.
Thank you very much. In that case, I'll close the meeting at, what's it, 6 minutes past 4. Thank you, everybody.
I think it's just a guidance thing, isn't it? Yes, I think insurance, but new. Well, I did think that.
So, but you know, I got
Well,
some idea.
I did just